ACC decided to design and establish the MPhil in Southern Urbanism because we detected a need for a bespoke training program that could really create a platform or a mechanism to get the next generation of urban scholars from the global south into the academic world. And so the MPhil is really designed as an interdisciplinary experience that can be a bridge between disciplinary specialization in some aspect of urban studies and going on to conducting PhD research in urban studies.
We have 3 core courses that are supposed to give kind of theoretical, more scholarly grounding to urban studies for all those who haven't been exposed to such yet, especially from a Southern perspective, so realizing the intellectual project of the program and of ACC more broadly. 2 of the core courses are in the first semester: Urban Theory, convened by Edgar and myself, and Urban Everyday, that's Professor Sophie Oldfield's, and she co-teaches it with Laura Nkula-Wentz. And then in the second semester we have Arts of Space, which similarly, although in a way it has a somewhat more particular focus on a theoretical grounding into how you start reading the built environment from a critical perspective.
A lot of the work that we do in urban studies in Southern Urbanism is focused on, in some way, around development, around state-driven, capital, structural processes that shape the city. But in cities all over, people are doing things themselves. Publics are constituting themselves. The Urban Everyday seminar is the core course that I teach. For me, it's really a passion. It links to my own research, and that's a beautiful way to bring teaching and research together. The Urban Everyday course takes seriously what are the ordinary things, the everyday acts that people do in the city all the time. Sometimes they're invisible. Sometimes these acts are contentious. Sometimes they are engaged in processes, in governance, in politics. So what the course does is it draws on a literature which uses ethnography, thick description, different methodologies of research and of writing to bring to the fore these practices. So to give you a feel for what those practices might be, sometimes they are participating. Sometimes they are protesting. In South African cities, actually in cities across the global south, protest is a very visible contemporary mode of contesting the city. But sometimes they're occupying, encroaching. Again, a very powerful theme in the global south, the everyday ways in which people create a space, find a way to be in the city. Sometimes there's a literature that focuses on waiting. All sorts of people in cities are waiting for the state, waiting for development, waiting for a more positive future, perhaps. But of course, in waiting, it's not passive. All sorts of activities, all sorts of forms of agency are ongoing. Some of this literature is about encountering the state, encountering powerful structural forces. Some of this is about encountering the market. So essentially, the course delves into these lovely, thick, descriptive pieces of work. And we do it both to understand things that are happening in the city. We do it to understand research as a way of representing and making a politics and a form of practice visible. And we also read lots of work about how do we do that? How, as researchers, do we have the methodological sus and the conceptual vocabulary to really be able to engage this really important set of practices?
Anyone who understands that cities are at the core of the organization and reorganization of our present and the places from which to imagine the future at this point in time, anyone who agrees with that sentiment and finds an aspect of cityness interesting from whatever background, I think should come and talk to us and find out if this is something for them.
I think it's a fantastic time to be a Southern Urban Scholar. We have an invitation to think differently. We have an invitation to do differently. We have a recognition that the ways in which we have theorized and written and engaged cities in the past isn't sufficient. It's not good enough. It needs to do better. It needs to be more creative. Our research needs to delve into spaces that we haven't thought about. It needs to be adept enough and creative enough to make visible these complex things going on in cities. So we're sitting in a context where we have a huge need for research. So in some ways that could be intimidating. There's a massive gap, but I think this program and our approach is really about embracing that gap, inserting ourselves in it, inhabiting it, and then thinking creatively. What can we do? How can we do it? And what that means for students is that there's lots of different ways you can find your voice, find your niche. There's lots of different ways in which you can then move forward as an urbanist.
This program is our most important long-term insurance policy. What we are doing is we are finding, we are training, we are nurturing, and we are promoting people who will become leaders in this field within the next 10 to 20 years. And so in terms of long-term institutional continuity and viability and presence and reputation in this field in the world, I'm convinced they're going to come from these cohorts who are going to do this program. And so to be there on the ground floor, to meet these students, to engage with them, to work with them, to learn from them, means that we are able to position the course and them in relation to the larger field. And ACC is probably the most globally connected African institution in the field. And therefore, the research we do, the students that we train, both have access to global opportunities, but also they have the potential to make that impact. And from the first two cohorts that we've seen, I am more than ever convinced about the impact in global urban studies that we'll be making.